So I was just playing around with some data from knifesteelnerds.com. Dr. Laren Thomas basically created all of this data or summarized all of this data. And I don't know if it's available to actually download and manipulate. So what I did is recreated all of it in Excel just so I can play around with it. What I was interested in specifically were these category ratings between low carbon or low alloy, high alloy, and stainless, and recreate some of these charts. So what I did is essentially manually transcribed it into Excel. Hopefully there's no errors. But what it allowed me to do is just play around and take a look at some of the data. So first off, I grouped all of the steels into three categories: low alloy, high alloy, and stainless, directly following that website's order, and the toughness, edge retention, and corrosion resistance ratings. And I believe all of these are essentially normalized between the groups or comparable between the groups. So for example, if I'm looking at a 5 in the stainless steel categories for edge retention, that is equivalent to a 5 in the high alloy edge retention category. And then I put the original order so I could always resort back to the original order on the website. Anyway, what I was struggling with was to understand which steel is better overall, quote unquote. And I think an easy way to do that, or a really easy way to do that, is just to simply sum up the three categories. Almost like an absolute value, but essentially if you just sum up each of these and give a total, you can get a rough idea of how these steels rank to each other. So for example, I've created this total column, and each of these rows is summed for that steel. And so then I color coded it. I auto sorted it by color. Green is higher, red is lower. And what we can see are basically the highest in the entire list is 21.5, and there's only 2 steels, I think, that meet that. Let me just sort this visually here for a minute. Actually, let's just do this in real time. So I'm going to remove color coding. And I am going to group within, I'm going to sort within each group. So all the low alloys, I'm going to just do a color sort, low to high. Then for the high alloys, same. And for the stainless steels, the same. And we can ignore these last here. These are additional data just for the chart I needed to create. Okay, so for the first group, low alloys, we go from a 6 to an 11.5. So basically one of the three categories are almost all zeros for this, the corrosion resistance. So obviously that makes sense. These are generally lower. I go to the next group, high alloys. These are not sorted in exactly any order other than what was on the website, but we can see it goes from around 13, 12, 13 up to 19. Okay. Then out of the stainless, same idea. We go from about a 15, 16, 13 I see is the lowest, all the way up to 21.5. Now to me, as just like an absolute value, function, I'm considering the highest is the best out of the three categories. I mean, that's just kind of a simple arithmetic. And the two highest in the entire library here is Magnacut and LC200N. Very interesting. The reason why I started on this exercise is because I care a lot about corrosion resistance. So I'm just kind of getting into knives or trying to pick out a good knife that I want to carry with me. And I'm finding out that there's a difference between like carbon steels or stainless versus non-stainless. And since I might use it for food once in a while and cut up an apple or something, I don't want to necessarily deal with non-stainless. So I didn't really understand that there was a difference, and that stainless steels are typically softer than non-stainless steels. So when I found Dr. Laren's website, that's kind of started me doing this analysis. So anyway, in my opinion, I'm in the stainless world. I don't necessarily care about the excellent performance of like high carbon steels. I'm much more interested in like high performing but stainless at the same time. And so this chart actually proves or supports exactly that. Magnacut and LC200N are the highest ranking categories. Let's sort this. I'm going to sort this entire. I'm going to sort this entire thing by total only. We're going to go highest to lowest. So just looking at that, there's basically Magnacut LC200N. Next, Vanex and 14C28N. And then S90V and S110V. And then interestingly enough, 420HC. Now, that doesn't make sense to me. It's a lower end or a medium end steel. How would that show up so high in the list? And then M398, S125. So I guess corrosion resistance, well, they're all stainless though, but that would have an outsized weight impact on this sort. And then AEBL is down the list here, and I know that's a really good steel. Okay, so let me reverse that sort. I'm going to go back to this original list. Let me do one other thing. So created two charts. First one, or here on the right, is the one that's already on Dr. Laren's website. It is the hardness versus cut chart. So there's no new information here. I actually had to go and kind of recreate these data points, X and Y, in this scatter plot. And I think I got it pretty close. But nothing new really to talk about there. But what I did is add a second chart. I just wanted to explore or experiment. So I ran a scatter plot, basically a regression analysis with a trend line, a linear trend line. I'm just starting to group different categories. So for example, if I start out with hardness against my total that I created, hardness against total, I don't see any relationship. I have a very low R-squared Pearson coefficient, basically a flat trend line, which shows that there's no relationship between Rockwell and then the total, I'm going to say total in quotes, rating of the steel. Then if I go to cut length, or TCC, total cards cut, I do see a relationship, a weak relationship, but there is a relationship. So the rating of the steel overall against total cut does have a positive relationship. It's a weak R-squared value, so it's weakly correlated. As you go up in cut length, your total rating goes up. That kind of makes sense. If I go total against toughness, I see no relationship. A flat line, and basically a 0 R-squared. So toughness does not necessarily have a relationship with total ranking. Now, it's very possible there are multiple factors here, so I'm just comparing two factors, but more in-depth analysis, we would be comparing 3 or more factors. This is just a very crude way to look at it. Okay, so total against edge retention, we do see a similar relationship again, 0.28 R-squared value, positive relationship. As edge retention goes up, total performance or the total ranking of the steel goes up. I go to corrosion resistance. This is very interesting. So this has a strong correlation. So a 0.74 R squared value. So it seems like corrosion resistance is strongly correlated with the total ranking of the steel. I don't understand why. I'd have to think more on why that is. I mean, I generally have a understanding of what's going on, but why would that have such a strong relationship? A lot of these carbon steels have zeros, and a lot of the stainlesses have some values in there. So I don't know if that's like outweighing or mismatching the relationship, but this is a strong relationship. Corrosion is actually one thing I care about more than the others, so it's kind of interesting. And I also have the carbon, chromium, and vanadium content over here. Let's just drag this over and see if there's a relationship between any of these. So total ranking versus carbon content. No, not really. It's a flat line, basically a 0 R squared, no real relationship there. Chromium, yeah, a pretty good relationship. Almost a 50% R squared, 0.5, 0.47. We see a positive relationship. That makes sense. I mean, if the corrosion resistance had a really strong relationship, and I guess it makes sense that the chromium percent somewhat shows similar results. And how about vanadium? Vanadium, very interesting. No, I'm going to say there is no relationship here. The R squared is somewhat meaningful. It's 0.2. And there is a trend here. This would look like a more flat trend, but all of this data in the 0 axis, I feel like, is weighting down, is skewing this trend line. If I were to remove all these low zeros, I bet you this would be a flat trend line, probably have 0 relationship. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to interpret all this data. It's definitely interesting. If I swap some of these around, so if I go back to total cards cut, instead of plotting my total against cards cut, let's just do some others. So hardness against total cards cut. 0.3, so 30% R squared. There's a relationship there. About toughness against total cards cut. So this side kind of makes sense if I were to 0.28 R squared. So as the toughness goes down, you can cut more cards or you get better edge retention. So I think that somewhat aligns. If I go to edge retention, interesting. So that's kind of the opposite. Very strong, 0.96% R squared. So as edge retention goes up, number of cards you can cut goes up. So that makes complete sense. That's why there's a really strong relationship there. Look how tight that line is. And corrosion resistance, I would say there's no trend there. 0.1% R squared, almost a flat line, kind of randomized data. No relationship. How about we swap to hardness? Yes. No. Total. No, I think we already did that. Carbon content against hardness. Yeah, there's a weak relationship. I would expect that to be stronger. It is somewhat of a positive relationship. As hardness goes up, the total ranking goes up. Sorry, the carbon content, as the hardness goes up, as the carbon content goes up, the hardness goes up. Chromium, no relationship, almost a 0. Vanadium, almost basically a 0. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't know, thought that was kind of interesting. Um, this data is interesting to anyone. I could post it somewhere. It's all credited to Dr. Laren Thomas, so it's not mine necessarily to do anything with. I'm sure we could ask him if he cared if it was public or if it was posted somewhere. But again, this is all on his website. Maybe anyone else would want to play around with the data or do some more in-depth analysis. Anyway, I think it's interesting. Two highest ranking, just based on the total, Magnacut and LC200N. I guess there might be a different way to do this. We could normalize this. First of all, we could weight each column depending on what people care about, because some people might not care about corrosion resistance at all, so they would just eliminate this from total. And I guess out of a maximum of 30, 21.5 out of 30 is the highest. Out of percentage, that's like a 67% or 70-ish% performance in quotes. But if you didn't care about corrosion resistance, you would only have 20 total. 20 total. Try this. That would be an 11.5 or 12.5. So yeah, it would up the percentage a bit. I don't know. Pretty interesting. I resort this. I just want to look at this again. So all stainless at the top. I guess that makes sense because, actually, of course that makes sense. Stainless is the only group that uses all three categories to the maximum. The low alloy and the high alloy obviously are weak in corrosion, not designed for corrosion, so of course they're not going to rank in that column, so it's always going to be a deficit in them. So actually, if we removed corrosion, let's see what happens. I only do a total for out of 20 for the two columns here, toughness and edge retention. Now what happens? It looks like 13.5 is about the maximum, and we have quite a few. Magnacut is a 12 next to 4V. That's interesting. That's still pretty damn high. The highest I'm seeing is 13.5 for 10V, 13.5 for ZMAX, Venatus, 13 Maximit, and then three 13.5s here for 10V, 15V, and 3V. And what about all the carbon? I guess these are the carbon steels, but what about crew wear? Okay, so crew wear is 13. Let's just sort this to get a clearer look. Okay, so interestingly, that makes sense. Suddenly we go to all carbon high alloy at the top when we remove corrosion resistance, maxing out at around 13, or maxing out at around 13.5. NV, all the V's. We could do a double two-factor sort. Really, we could sort by total, but then also by hardness and maybe. Well, no, I guess that wouldn't make sense. We already factored that in when we were doing that scatter plot. In theory, higher hardness should have higher edge retention numbers. I guess that's kind of what we. Oh, did we prove that? Did I prove that? I ran this. We go to, I think we did not, right? Hardness against edge retention. Yeah, it was a weak relationship. Hmm. Then there's one stainless at the top. So if we remove corrosion resistance, interestingly, we remove corrosion resistance from the analysis, outside of all the high carbons, the next group that comes up is stainless S90V. Then we go back to a carbon, 4V, and go back to stainless again, AEBL and Magnacut. I still don't get how 420HC is so high in there. I guess because it's gotten super tough, super corrosion resistant, although we're not even looking at corrosion right now, but yeah. Then LC200N is down lower. Nitro V, Vanix. Anyway, like I said in the beginning, I actually care much more about corrosion resistance, especially for like using my knife daily. I am going to go back to my original sort. And stay with this order. And 21.5 is the highest. Magnacut and LC200N. Sort this one more time, including corrosion and stainless, because that's what I care about. Yeah, 14C28N with low edge retention somehow jumps up in there, that high corrosion. And S90V and S110V are right behind. 420HC, somehow it's there too. I think this is what Leatherman devices use, Leatherman tools use 420HC. Now, how is S30V way down here, 17.5, so low on the list? Yeah, I guess the only thing I could think is this 3-category ranking system is a little subjective. It's not necessarily empirical. Oh, let me sort that the other way, smallest to largest. All right, this is the original order from Dr. Laren's website. Get the chromium content. In fact, let's sort by highest to lowest. 20%, NX 18%. Of course, all the stainlesses are at the top. 15%, S30V 14%. Sort by carbon. Of course, all the high alloys will be at the top, although S125V is there too. N110, and N398. Oh, carbon's low. Okay, I didn't realize that. So only 3%. Interesting. A390, S60V, Maxamet. Now, Magnacut is way down in the middle. Where about vanadium? If we sort by vanadium. EPL. So highest vanadium 15V, 125V, Rex 121, S110V, K390, S90V. All right, I don't know what this is telling me, but it's interesting to play around with it. All right, that's all I have. Signing off.